So this question is for the white people. When was the last time that you were the only white person in a room? And I'm not talking about an event. I'm not talking about that time you hung out with your black friends. When was the last everyday situation, like being in a classroom, going to a meeting, at a coffee shop, where you looked around and you said to yourself, man, I am the only white person as far as the eye can see? Looking out at this audience today, the answer is clearly not at TEDx. So, while you are thinking about that, I want you to picture this. I am in the 9th grade, honors English class, and we are reading the book, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, out loud. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with that book or haven't read it in a long time, that's okay. There are only a couple things you need to know that are relevant to this story. The book takes place in Mississippi in the 1800s. And in it, author Mark Twain uses the word nigger 219 times. I know because we read most of those 219 times out loud in my honors English class. And yes, in case you haven't figured out where this story is going, I was the only black person in that class. Now, that wasn't the first time, and it certainly has not been the last time that I found myself in an educational space or a workspace or even a community space where I was the only black person. And what I've realized over time is that there is a very real cost that is incurred when some folks are constantly having to navigate everyday situations as the only or the other. Now, I know what you're thinking. Elsie, girl, this is TEDx. This is a stage for new ideas. This isn't new. We've heard this all before. Maybe some of you are even thinking, Elsie, girl, are you an affirmative action invite? Now see, if this was a room full of black people, y'all would have done more than just awkwardly chuckle. That would have been a full-blown laugh. But at the end of the day, you're right. Because over the years, there has been a lot of really powerful research that has documented the way that this sort of mental tax shows up in the day-to-day lives of minority and marginalized people. So what I want to talk about today is how does this tax affect those of you who are not directly impacted every day? What is the cost on a societal level, not just an individual one? That's the question that I've been kind of grappling with over the last few months as I prepared for this TED Talk. And what I've discovered is that there is an invisible brain drain that is happening in our country. And it happens when minority and marginalized individuals are constantly using valuable mental energy to navigate things like tokenism and microaggression and prejudice, instead of using that energy to create and innovate or contribute more deeply to our society. Now, although these people are not leaving our country, as long as we are not able to tap into the full scope of their creativity and their leadership, they might as well be. So when I say invisible brain drain, in order for you to kind of understand what I mean, it is important that you know a little bit about how the brain works. And I do mean a little bit, because among my many talents, neuroscience is not one of them. But that's okay, because it just means that anybody in this audience can understand what I'm about to say. So in 2017, some really smart researchers did a study. And what they found was that when we are engaged in the work of creating and managing other people's perceptions of us, there are three parts of our brain that are primarily being taxed. And among other things, these are the parts of our brain that are responsible for regulating our emotions, helping us make decisions, tapping into our creativity, and allowing us to envision and plan for a different future. Now, what that says to me is that when some folks are doing the day-to-day work of navigating their otherness, of having to think about how am I being perceived right now as the only woman in this space, as the only person of color, the only differently abled person in this space, that they are using incredibly important parts of their brain to do so. And for them, and for all of us, the opportunity cost is steep. What's scariest is that as a society, we don't even get to see what it is that we're missing out on. Now, this invisible brain drain that I'm talking about, it is a phenomenon that impacts people of all marginalized identities. But for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about women of color in particular, for a couple different reasons. One, I am one. Two, because women of color live at the intersection of two different marginalized identities, that of their gender and that of their race. And three, because women of color will be the majority of women in the United States by the year 2050. And so when we think about a true societal impact that a brain drain like this can have, it's really important for us to pay attention to this population. So I want to take a few minutes and envision what this could look like in real time. Serena Williams, arguably one of the best and certainly one of the flyest tennis players of all time. Jane Cook Wright, known as the mother of chemotherapy. Mary Golda Ross, first Native American female rocket scientist. Maya Angelou, badass poet. Frida Kahlo, badass painter. Beyonce is Beyonce. But when I look at this list, I have to ask myself, how many individuals are missing? How many individuals are not able to reach their full potential because they're having to work twice as hard to get half as far as those who are not being asked to extend that extra mental labor? Now, if you ask me, one is too many. So, what do we do about it? Well, it's time we started creating a whole lot more fourth places. And for you to understand what a fourth place is, I need to explain to you what a third place is. Third place was a term coined by sociologist Ray Oldenburg. And it refers to the places that we spend the majority of our time. Our first place is home. And that's the place where a lot of our interactions are very relational. It is very steeped in the energy and responsibilities of the domestic sphere, especially for women. Our second place is work. And that's where a lot of our interactions tend to be more formal, more transactional. And then you have third places. Third places are your local library, your neighborhood park, your favorite coffee shop, that brunch spot that you love going to on Saturday mornings. Third places are the places where we go to unwind, where we go to connect and reconnect to the people in our lives who matter to us, where we think about and talk about and process the things that matter to us. And as you might imagine, third places are critical to communities because they can serve as catalysts and incubators to ideas and innovation. The problem is that sometimes in third places, we are still the only one. And many times it becomes clear that we are not even truly welcome. It's time we start creating fourth places. A fourth place is a community gathering space that centers the ideas and identities of a particular marginalized group. They can be used for work, they can be used for social, they can be a combination of both. So this is a picture of the Mary Lou Williams Center for Black Culture on the campus of Duke University, where I went to school. And the Mary Lou was one of the first fourth places I ever experienced. As a young Black female undergrad on a predominantly white campus, the Mary Lou was one of the only places that I could go and see myself reflected in the art and the programming and the staff and the students I was surrounded by. So shout out to the Mary Lou for being that place, because I didn't have a Black professor in college until my junior year. But my freshman year, everybody who cleaned my dorm was Black. So shout out to the Mary Lou for being that fourth place. Because college campuses have realized that you cannot invite historically underrepresented populations onto a campus, into a community that was not created with them in mind, that they historically have not even had access to until the last 2 or 3 generations, and expect them to thrive. It doesn't happen. Now, in my community, I've created a space, a co-working and community space that centers women of color called Zora's House. And I like to describe Zora's House by saying, imagine that your favorite coffee shop and your homegirl's house had a baby, and that's Zora's House. Zora's House is a place in my community where women of color can come to work and write and create and connect and laugh and drink wine. We drink a lot of wine at Zora's House. And what I've learned in the months since that space has been open is that I was not the only one who was craving a space like that. Our world is going to continue to become more complex. And we are gonna need all hands on deck. We are gonna need a true diversity of ideas and experiences if we really want to create a brighter future. And for people like me, that doesn't always mean allowing us access to the spaces we historically have not been granted access to. It also means helping us and supporting us as we create spaces of our own. Thank you.